First today, was Wellington's CBD declared safe too quickly after Monday's very large earthquake near Kaikoura? The central city was reopened for business on Tuesday, just one day after what was one of the three biggest earthquakes to hit New Zealand in over a century. Workers returned to office buildings, but as the week's gone on, more than 60 buildings have been closed, with at least 2 set for demolition. Yesterday, dozens of people were evacuated from their downtown apartments because of aftershock fears, and there's no indication yet of when they'll be able to go back. The acting Civil Defence Minister, Gerry Brownlee, has expressed surprise and displeasure at how quickly the decision was made to say that the central city would reopen. Wellington's Mayor, Justin Lester, is in the Wellington studio with me. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Kathryn.
It's been a long week, and I know a lot of complex decisions have to be made, but these are very important decisions, as important as you get to make in your job. What was the process you went through from the time that earthquake struck, affecting people in the South Island most devastatingly, but a big shake in Wellington as well?
Yes, thank you, Kathryn. And first of all, I just want to say my sympathies are with the people of Kaikoura and North Canterbury in the first instance. I know they're going through some difficult times at the moment, so we're thinking about them. We have had a significant inconvenience in Wellington. We've got people that are legitimately concerned, and so I want to acknowledge that, and I express my sympathies as well, what people are going through. And I just want to say, look, people who do want assistance, if they need welfare assistance, we have operations centres within Wellington City Council that have been formed, and we encourage you to contact the council if you've got any issues and you want to talk to us. In terms of the decisions we make, look, the earthquake happened in the early hours of Sunday night, Monday morning. We're all aware of that, and then we go through a process. We sent our engineers, structural engineers, out through the entire city, looking at all the public spaces and looking at all the building facades and identifying the level of public risk. We need to make sure as well there are 17,000 people that live in the CBD, so those people are already present within the CBD, and we need to make sure that that they are safe. We don't want to unnecessarily confine them to their buildings. That's not good in a long-term situation either, and we've got many thousands of businesses that would normally operate on a Monday morning. So our very quick decision, and we made it swiftly, was that we were going to close the CBD on Monday. That was to allow us to undertake all these checks. Following the extensive analysis of all the public areas, we determined that the CBD in itself is safe to re-enter. And it's important that we make that decision, we make it early, and we allow people to get back and to enter those buildings where necessary to do their engineering assessments. So just so people understand, the council doesn't undertake the private engineering assessments of individual private buildings. We do the external assessments in the public areas to make sure they are safe. We then require and we expect that private building owners will go into their buildings. People will not be allowed to re-enter those buildings until such time as they are declared safe to occupy. We've got 3 buildings that have suffered significant damage in particular.
Okay. I don't want to interrupt you, but all this is on the record. What I want to ask you is, what is the process that you go through to make decisions before you open that CBD? The individual businesses are one thing. Neighbouring businesses have been impacted by the buildings that have now been deemed unsafe, one of which is a car park building next to the Courtney Place, one of the busiest day and night precincts, at risk of imminent collapse in an aftershock, and we're told its likely direction forward would be towards Courtney Place and a very, very busy entertainment centre there. You've brought people back into the city on buses, you've brought commuters back into the city, people on foot. So it's not just about the individual building owners being able to access their buildings, it's about the decision you were announcing on Monday afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. And the strong advice we have was that decision was correct and remains correct.
Advice from whom?
From our expert advisors. So
who are whom? What are their roles?
The Wellington Regional Emergency Management Officers. So they are put together to manage and respond in a disaster event. So we work with them. We have controllers who are on the ground, and controllers are appointed from within Wellington City Council as well. So these are experts on the ground, experience in dealing with this and experience in dealing with earthquakes, major events, including the Christchurch earthquake.
Okay, let's be specific about their various roles and responsibilities. The acting Civil Defence Minister, and I'm reading between the lines, you often don't have to with Mr Brownlee, but I'm reading between the lines that he thinks you were too quick off the mark.
Oh, look, I've talked to Minister Brownlee.
He has made this clear that this is a local civil defence matter. So who are the players with which expertise that feed into that decision?
So we have.
And I don't want you to name names. What are
Yes.
their positions? What are their skills?
So REMO, the Wellington Regional Emergency Management Office, that is in play continually. So that always exists. And they have a base up in Thorndon. And we have individuals there who look after the region's response to major events. So in the event of an event, as we had on Sunday evening, for example, our Emergency Operations Centre then comes to life. So that's where we've been basing our recovery our response and our recovery program from that centre. And we have group controllers who come in from appointed positions. Many of those are trained from within council, and they then come into those roles. We sit down with our building consents team, with our engineers, and we do rapid assessments of all buildings and public space across the city.
You see, it's the rapid assessments that's becoming an issue. How can you have rapid assessments marrying up with what you called extensive analysis by Monday afternoon?
They're rapid in that you go out and you start doing them straight away, but you do them for public safety.
So you can tell us whether or not facades have come down. You can tell us whether or not there's glass on the street. What you cannot tell us is whether high-rise buildings or indeed multi-storey car park blocks that were closed for 18 months after the 2013 quake and are now likely to be deconstructed are a risk.
Yes, no, what we can say is whether they're likely to fall down. Is what we and
Well, you didn't say that on Monday.
Whether there is,
it was Thursday before we heard about the Reading car park.
No, it's the level of public risk. So let's please understand the level of public risk. So you, for example, through a building closed, Stats House, you can walk outside Stats House. There's not in any risk of falling on top of you. That's the public safety element. Before you re-enter the building, you have to understand whether it's safe to go in.
So will you explain to me why it was then that the Reading cinemas, halfway through a movie, were evacuated? All this happens about 3 days after the quake. So that's the level of risk determined then, 3 days after the quake. And yet you're telling me there was no risk apparently on Monday.
No, let's be very clear about this. So those buildings that have been evacuated as a precaution only. Okay, so those buildings are not affected in and around that car parking building. The car parking building, there's a risk there if there's a significant aftershock that something could happen with the car parking building.
That it will implode, in fact, is the risk.
The risk is that it could fall down. So as a precaution...
And when the head of the fire service says it could fall towards Courtney Place, he himself is on record saying it would be most likely to fall in on itself. But when he says it could fall towards Courtney Place, I've got to tell you, as a resident of the city, and I'm sure there are many others listening here right now, knowing how busy that precinct is day and night, we want a pretty clear assurance about that, and perhaps decisions made on Thursday might have been made a little earlier.
So to understand the context of that, he's talking about the direction of Courtney Place. So there are buildings in between. So there is a risk if that building was to fall.
There's a cinema building and an entertainment complex right next door.
Which is, yes, absolutely. So if it did fall down in the event of a major aftershock in the future, there is a risk it could impact a neighbouring building, and that's why we made the decision to evacuate.
What do you mean in the future? The aftershock could have come on Tuesday or on Wednesday.
So that's
or on
why
Thursday.
That's why we go in straight away to these buildings. Again, this is a private building. That building could have fallen down on Sunday. We're very fortunate that it didn't. So we go round and we put these cordons in place to evacuate the areas, and we will use our emergency powers, if required, to take that building down, and we'll do that straight away.
All right, okay. The decision not to red zone, which is to say stay out of the CBD, cars stay out, buses stay out, taxis stay out, pedestrians stay out, workers stay out of the CBD. When and how was that decision made to not go that route, to let people back in as early as Tuesday?
So that decision was made on Monday.
With a major weather event happening, by the way, that ended up with everyone being stuck in town.
That was made on Monday.
Okay.
That was made on Monday in light of the information at hand. And let's be realistic about this. So I've checked in the past 24 hours. So last night and today I've checked with the Prime Minister. I've spoken with the Minister of Housing, Nick Smith, the Minister of Local Government, Sam Lotuinga, and this morning with Minister Gerry Brownlee as well. And they support the actions we are taking. And their response to Christchurch and the experiences there, the greatest calamity you can face is to have your city not functioning. So we want to make sure that the city is up and functional, but at the same time you take into account the public risk.
Can we just pause? Just roll back. This was Monday afternoon. I'm sure you felt that quake the same as every other Wellingtonian did. And again, can I say our first thoughts are with those whose businesses have been, people have lost family members and what has happened down south. Please let's acknowledge that first. But we're talking about an existing risk to a very urbanised place that we know carries a high earthquake risk, and we're talking about your systems being tested very readily. That earthquake was very large. How that earthquake could not have raised serious questions about how some buildings would have performed and how you could reach that point of being so confident Monday afternoon and then had to dial back over a period of days. This is where I want to get to. So tell me how that decision not to red zone, even for one day, just to say for one day, give us a day to work our way around here. Explain to me how that decision was reached.
So we took the Monday, for example, to do all of those assessments, and we worked through a series of questions to decide whether you declare a local emergency or not. And we hadn't triggered that threshold for a local emergency based on the level of damage that was apparent within the city. And for the most part, we haven't had major catastrophic failure of buildings. There have been largely
What if we had, Mr. Mayor?
This
is the point.
If we had, this is the point.
This is the point.
Let
if
me make
that
this
had
very
happened
clear,
and
Kathryn.
lives had been lost, you know the situation you would be in right now.
Absolutely, and that's why that would have triggered a different decision. But we didn't reach that point. That threshold wasn't crossed, and that's why we've taken the steps we did.
How is the threshold reached? What is it that would have caused a different decision to be made to stay out of the city Tuesday?
Catastrophic failure of buildings. And we did not have catastrophic failure of buildings. We have hundreds of buildings across the CBD. The vast majority have fared relatively well. We have 3 buildings.
The question
Stats House. Let me finish, please. Stats House. We have Molesworth Street, and we have Reading Car Park. And I expect over the course of the next 2 weeks, there may be some others where people come back and say, look, we need to undertake more work. But those buildings will not be re-entered. Likewise, Reading Car Park was not re-entered following the weekend. There were no people in there or no car parks, but the buildings around that car park were evacuated as a precaution.
There were people walking around it until it was roped off. This is often where the fatalities happen, not inside a building, but on the street outside of them.
Absolutely, and as soon as we became aware of an issue around that building, we put a cordon in place.
So tell me about Molesworth Street. How was it detected that building was so sheared and damaged that it was at risk of imminent failure? People going back to work in Red Cross, people going back to work in fashion stores next door, then being evacuated. How was it determined that building was so compromised?
Through an engineering assessment. So an engineer was able to go through the building and do the assessment.
Was it an official assessment, or was it spotted by someone who said that looks dangerous?
No, it was spotted through an engineering assessment. This is a system working. So the Engineering Code of Ethics requires that when engineers go into the private buildings and they ascertain the level of damage, that they report that damage immediately to the City Council alongside the landlord, so the building owner. So we get that information, we get up there, and engineering also requires peer reviews of this initial assessment, and we get up there straight away and we take decisive action. So we'll use our emergency powers for that building, for example, because we want to weed out buildings that in the city that have structural damage and pose a significant future risk. That's really important. We don't want buildings in the city that aren't going to withstand a major earthquake in the future. We've been incredibly fortunate to have had this experience in Wellington and to have no loss of life. Most of our infrastructure has maintained consistency throughout, and that includes water, that includes roads, that includes sewage.
Can I interrupt you there and make the point that is what we were saying in Christchurch at the end of 2010?
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, it was February 2011 that city went through the worst.
And we are consciously aware of that, and that's why we're taking the steps we're taking now to weed out those buildings that aren't likely to withstand a future event. So that is what we're doing now with those 3 buildings in particular. And if there are more that come up, we will also isolate those buildings and we will make sure they're not re-entered, but they don't pose a safety risk to the public.
I wonder if on reflection there might have been a more nuanced message that could have been issued on Tuesday. I do recall in the 2013 quakes in Wellington, I acknowledge the difference that there was masonry falling there was broken glass on the streets, there was obvious superficial risk to people being on the streets. But I do recall also a message along the lines of, if you don't feel like you want to go to work today, you shouldn't be needing to go to work today. And I'm wondering whether, in order for people to have confidence in this system, which they truly need to have in an earthquake risk city, whether you want to rethink your communications and the messaging around this.
And that's absolutely what we said. So we said, before you go back into work, please check with your employer, please check with the landlords within these buildings to make sure they are safe to re-enter. What we said is the public aspects, because you remember that Wellington CBD is effectively our largest suburb. We've got 17,000 people who were already resident on Sunday night and on Monday in the CBD. They need to know whether it's safe or not for them them to leave their apartments and for people to get in to clean up the damage, for cleaners to come in, for engineers to come into the CBD, whether they should be even driving into the city.
I understand that complication that there's residents there as well, but as I said, when you're talking about bringing the workers back into the city, which brings sheer numbers back into the city, brings people back onto the streets under building facades, and just brings numbers back through, whether a more nuanced message might have been possible.
That was our absolute message. We can't control what the media...
Well, it wasn't your absolute message, I'm sorry, because I'm looking at a soundbite saying the CBD will be open for business tomorrow.
There's the problem. You're looking at a soundbite. We can't control what the media reports. We provide extensive public information through our releases that are cautious, that focus on public safety, but also give people accurate and up-to-date information. I would love to have our own channel that sent out the message, but we can't control the media message, and likewise we can't control the media message into the future, but RNZ and other organisations I think have been very responsible, but we don't control those sound bites that go out.
They do. They come out of your mouth in the first instance, and they need to be very carefully shaped.
And that's why we are careful in what the shaping is, and we've always said consistently, please check with your employers before you return to work. So likewise, for example, in our own building in the council, we have now returned to reoccupy one half of our offices, but we're doing remedial works where there's been some superficial damage on the other. So we convey that to our employees, and they don't come back into town until it's safe to re-enter for them.
On that note, people having to have confidence in their employers then as well, and indeed tenants have to have confidence in what their landlords are telling them. Just remind me, do we have some kind of a register of buildings, and particularly major buildings, that people can use to check ultimately, obviously not immediately, or indeed that the council can check, to ensure that what people are saying about inspections, A, has happened and B, is accurate?
Look, we have a list of earthquake-prone buildings, so we go through and we assess those buildings that we know, and we that are likely to pose more threats in the city, and they're the ones we give more attention as well. However, I mean, ultimately it comes down to those private buildings and the private landlords. If you've got concern as a tenant, and I share your concern, I want to make sure that these buildings perform, I want to make sure that the city is safe. The last thing I want as mayor of this city is for anybody, any single person to be injured or to have any fatalities in the city, and that's my ultimate concern, and that keeps me awake at night. So we will not let anything take place, but we cannot control what happens in private buildings. But as soon as we are alerted, and under the Engineering Code of Ethics, as soon as we are alerted to a problem, we take swift action in conjunction with that building owner, and that's why we activate the system.
Thank you for coming in. Justin Lester is the Mayor of Wellington.